We heard earlier in the programme from George Eustace, who said that it's right for all of these questions to be looked at. He did say on the face of it that David Cameron didn't do anything wrong and that the system, in many ways, is actually a pretty good one. Do you agree with him?
Well, I think what we're seeing in all of this is that the era of Tory sleaze is well and truly back. And what's happened with the Greensill scandal is really quite shocking. You've got a former Prime Minister employed by a wealthy organisation who is then using his personal relationships with existing ministers, including the Chancellor of the Exchequer, and persuading them to do favours that would not have been open to other businesses or organisations.
They didn't do the favours, did they? He didn't manage to persuade them to do the favours. They were rejected for the COVID
Well, we don't
loans.
entirely know, do we? Because Greensill did get access. Greensill did get access to the framework loan schemes, and it's not entirely clear how they got access to that. They were one of only 2 unregulated banks that were treated in that way. We don't know whether that was as a result of the lobbying that David Cameron was doing. Now, what we've seen so far is a couple of texts exchanged between Rishi Sunak and David Cameron. In one of those, the Chancellor says that he will push officials hard to do favours for Greensill. That of itself may be a breach of the Ministerial Code, and that of itself needs to be investigated, because ministers should be acting in a way that is impartial and they should be pushing things directly onto their officials when this happens. But we haven't seen all the texts or the secret phone calls that went on between David Cameron and Rishi Sunak, and we really need to, in order to understand exactly what's going on. We can't just dismiss this in the way that Mr Eustace tried to do earlier this morning on your show.
So what I'm interested in, because I think it's very easy for Labour to throw around words like cronyism, like Tory sleaze, as you did. What exactly do you want to happen? Well, what needs to change?
What we've been calling for is an open parliamentary investigation into exactly what's been going on.
So we've got lots of investigations, haven't we?
But we need an open...
What do you want to actually happen? What needs to change in the rules?
This hasn't just started with Greensill. So a year ago in the House of Commons, when we had Robert Jenrick, the Communities Secretary, involved in the West Ferry scandal, he admitted he had broken the law to do favours for a billionaire Tory party donor and helped him dodge £40 billion in tax.
But the way to get around this, and I appreciate that there's lots of concerns over lobbying, about access, what needs to change?
Well, one of the things that needs to change, and I'll use that example if I can, Sophie, because I wrote to the Cabinet Secretary asking for an inquiry into Mr Jenrick to see whether he had broken the Ministerial Code. The Prime Minister blocked it, so the inquiry didn't happen. And what seems to be going on here is that we've got the Greensill case, the examples with Matt Hancock, the examples with West Ferry and Robert Jenrick. In every case, Number 10 blocks the investigations from going on.
There's lots of investigations,
so
aren't there? It's like 8.
Well, they're trying to mark their own homework. The man that they've put in charge of the Greensill investigation, Nigel Boardman, is on the board of a bank with very close links to the Conservative.
But there's an awful lot of other inquiries going on already. It feels to me like the problem isn't that we haven't got enough inquiries. We've got loads of inquiries. The problem is no one seems to know what should actually change to clean up
what
politics.
we need is an open inquiry, not one where the Conservatives are marking their own homework. Because Boris Johnson has shown repeatedly over the past year he's not interested in exposing what's going wrong, and he's not interested in stopping what's going wrong. If we have an independent parliamentary inquiry into what's going on, open and transparent, and in David Cameron's own words, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Well, let's expose this whole situation to that sunlight. Let's see exactly what's going on. Let's pull in everybody to public hearings that the public can see as well as MPs, and let's find out what's going on, and then let's put in place the measures that will prevent it from recurring. One of them might well be that the Prime Minister should not be the person who decides whether there are investigations into his own ministers for breaches of the Ministerial Code. Perhaps an independent person should be doing that, so that the Prime Minister can't then be accused of covering up wrongdoing by his own ministers.
Is there an argument that Labour would be just the same as this if you were in power? And if you look at the evidence, right, if you look at this, for example, David Evans' story in the newspaper today, Labour's General Secretary won a series of taxpayer contracts from Croydon Council. Labour on one council, deputy leader happens to be the mother of his child. Is this evidence that if Labour gets a chance, they would do exactly the same thing? It's just that the fact that you're so far away from power for so long, the companies aren't paying for the influence.
I saw that the Conservatives had put this out, and if that's the best they can do to try and deflect from what they're doing, then it's a pretty miserable attempt.
OK, how about this then?
What David was doing, it was an open and transparent procurement process, which is the polar opposite of what's been going on with Greensill or the company that Matt Hancock has shares in that he failed to declare, that's been winning millions of pounds in contracts from the NHS.
He did declare it. That's exactly the point. He did declare it.
He didn't declare that his family had shares in this company that's been winning millions of pounds in contracts from the NHS. But did the rules oblige him to do that? He declared it in exactly the way that he was obliged to. That's why we know about it. I don't think he did, and that's why we need an investigation into that as well. It's repeatedly happening with minister after minister after minister.
Talk about Greensill then. The Shadow Defence Secretary John Healey also lobbied the government to allow Greensill access to COVID loans. He says it was the right thing to do because he was trying to protect a steel plant in his constituency. Presumably, David Cameron thought it was the right thing to do as well. It's just that he happened to have better access to ministers than John Healey did.
Constituency MPs are asked to act on behalf of businesses in their constituencies, and as constituency MPs, that's part of the job. David Cameron is not an MP. David Cameron was being employed by Greensill directly and being paid to try and get them preferential treatment from the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who was a friend of his, whose number he had on WhatsApp. An MP acting for a local business is a million miles away from what's been going on with this situation. And I am afraid, the kind of behaviour we've been seeing from this government is not the behaviour you would expect of an advanced Western democracy. It's what you would associate with a tin pot dictatorship. And Britain deserves an awful lot better than that. We have to shine a light on the sleaze that is corroding the heart of this government so we can stop it and get back to the kind of government that the British people can have trust in.
OK, I'm keen to ask you a couple more things about COVID while I have you as well. Now, NHS providers are very worried about the backlog in the NHS caused by the pandemic. They said it could be 5 years to clear. How concerning is that?
Well, it's incredibly concerning. I've had constituents coming to me now that have had very urgent operations for things like cancer delayed by months. Now, frankly, if you've got cancer, you can't afford to wait for months. I mean, part of the problem here is that the NHS had already been underfunded by the time we went into this pandemic. The pandemic was always going to make it more difficult, but we really need now to be looking at everything that can be done to make sure that people that have urgent treatment needed in the NHS can go ahead and get it. And one way to do that is to make sure that we keep a lid on the situation with COVID right now. So we have to keep rolling out the vaccination programme, but also we need to do much better with contact tracing and testing once we get out of this initial period, because new variants of the disease are coming out and we need to identify them and crack down on them quickly. Third thing we need to do is keep control of the borders. So the government still does not have a comprehensive quarantine programme for people coming into the country.
Should David Cameron still be going to... David Cameron has a slip. Should Boris Johnson still be going to India, given that?
I think he shouldn't be. No, I mean, there are new variants emerging all around the world. The government is telling people don't travel if you don't have to absolutely travel. I can't see why the Prime Minister can't conduct his business with the Indian government by Zoom. So many of us do that these days. And I think the Prime Minister, all of us in public life, need to try and set an example. I'd much rather the Prime Minister did it by Zoom than travelling to India.
Just finally, YouGov poll this week gave the Conservatives a 14-point lead over Labour. Now, I know it's just one poll, but you've got elections in just a few weeks' time and it feels like the polls are going in the wrong direction. At what point do you start to panic?
It's just one poll. Let's wait and see what happens in the elections. They're only a few weeks away. After I've finished in your studio, I'm off door knocking in Nottinghamshire with my colleagues, so I'm going to hear what the voters have got to say and we'll see on the 6th of May what they think.